Chapter 34 to 36. Goten could clearly feel that after his fusion with the bloodline of the legendary Super Saiyan, his power had not just increased exponentially. The strength of his body had undergone a complete transformation. It was no wonder that in the DBZ movie version, the Super Saiyan Broly could resist Goku's Kamehameha wave with his bare face and remain unscathed. Their eyes flashed with unparalleled excitement, mixed with envy and admiration. The power Goten had just released might be a height they would never reach in their lifetime. Goten-san, the strength you just displayed, is that your true power? Kibito asked, his voice filled with admiration and envy. It's unbelievable. I never dreamed that a mortal could possess such a powerful force. Goten-san, you are incredibly strong. Shin chimed in, his fists clenched in excitement. The power you just displayed, I believe even Majin Buu cannot be your opponent. Actually, the power I just displayed isn't my true strength. Goten shook his head, looking at the excited pair. And this power isn't enough to eliminate Majin Buu. Although the fusion with the bloodline of the legendary Super Saiyan had made his basic strength incredibly strong, it was still not enough to completely destroy Majin Buu. After all, Majin Buu's super regeneration ability was still very formidable. As long as he was not completely destroyed, he could recover again. And after the original Buu recovered, his power would not weaken in any way. This thing was indeed very difficult to deal with. What? Shin and Kibito were completely dumbfounded upon hearing Goten's words. You mean the incredibly strong power just now isn't your real strength? The energy Goten had just released was simply unimaginable for them. They estimated that even if they trained for another 1,000,000 years, they might not be able to reach that level. But they hadn't expected that it wasn't Goten's real strength. What's more, Goten was just a kid. How strong would he become if given enough time to grow? The thought alone made them tremble. Goten nodded. He wanted to feel how strong the he would be after his fusion with the bloodline of the legendary Super Saiyan. And the God Realm was the most ideal place. If it was on Earth, if he went berserk or couldn't control his own energy, it might cause a devastating blow to the planet. But the God Realm was different. Even if the entire realm was destroyed, at least Shin and Kibito could use Kai to leave. At worst, they could rebuild it when the time came. Gulp. Then can you show us your full strength? Shin asked, swallowing hard. The strength Goten had just shown was enough to shock them. Now they wanted to see how strong Goten would be after he unleashed his full strength. I'm also curious, what kind of level can the strongest fighter in this universe achieve? Kibito also stared at Goten expectantly. In his heart, Goten had become the most powerful warrior in the universe. Okay, Goten agreed, a faint smile playing at the corner of his mouth. Since the two of you are so interested, let's take a look. But Shin suddenly felt that Goten's smile was a bit strange. It seemed like something bad was going to happen. By the way, I still can't fully control the power I'm about to unleash, so you'd better stay a little far away. Goten turned his head, an innocent smile on his face, and kindly reminded the two of them. Hearing this, the pupils of Shin and Kibito shrank suddenly. Then they looked at Goten with wide eyes. Shin suddenly realized, so that was why I felt uneasy just now. After a moment of surprise and bewilderment, Kibito hurriedly pulled Shin to move away and used Kai and appeared thousands of feet away. Then they hid behind a mountain peak. But it felt like it wasn't safe enough. Shin quickly moved his hands, and an energy barrier appeared around the two of them. This made them feel more at ease. Seeing that the two had retreated 1,000 feet away, Goten also began to prepare to transform. Then let me experience the legendary Super Saiyan form. After the voice fell, he clenched his fists violently. His eyes instantly became extremely firm. In the next second, a deep roar came from his throat. Rumble. The ground suddenly began to shake violently. The gravel on the ground floated directly in midair. The airwaves under his feet began to spread rapidly, like a tornado. An overwhelming aura instantly filled the entire God Realm, and then began to spread rapidly towards the surroundings. Rumble. The deafening sound of collapse sounded one after another, and the surrounding mountain peaks continued to collapse under the terrifying airwaves. At this time, Goten's aura continued to increase sharply, but that aura was very restless. Heavens! Oh my gosh! Is this kid a monster? Shin exclaimed. What kind of aura is this? The entire God Realm is filled with it. He had never felt this kind of aura before. It was as unfathomable as an abyss. Kibito had already opened his mouth in a daze, completely shocked and speechless. He hadn't expected to see such a superpower in his lifetime. And in the shocked eyes of the two, Goten began to change. The black hair was suddenly bundled up high, and the vibrant green energy around the body became more and more surging, appearing like a jet. The black eyeballs suddenly disappeared and became hollow and pale. Swish. In the next second, the black hair turned directly into vibrant green in an instant. At this moment, the atmosphere had once again discovered an earth-shaking change. At this time, Goten's aura had obviously surpassed that of Broly. Roar! A beastly roar emanated from Goten's throat. At this time, it felt like he was a wild beast that was completely out of control. The energy was constantly expanding. The martial arts GI on his upper body had been completely torn, and he was much bullier than when he had become Super Saiyan. The blue veins on his face were wriggling like little snakes. Impressively, at this time Goten had transformed into the legendary Super Saiyan form. Goten extended his arms and gradually levitated. Rustle. A rusting sound filled the air as circles of formidable airwaves continuously spread outwards. The ground collapsed in a circle, forming a semicircular crater that reached hundreds of feet deep. At this point, Goten seemed to have regained his composure, but his eyes were still vacant. The pupils completely vanished. Coupled with the vibrant green light radiating from his body, he bore a striking resemblance to Broly. At this time, Shin and Kibito, who were hiding thousands of feet away, were already drenched in cold sweat from fear. The power Goten had just displayed was truly terrifying. Even as gods, they felt a tremendous sense of oppression. They had never experienced this kind of pressure before, not even from Majin Buu. Kaishin Salma, Goten's pupils disappeared. Has he lost control? Kibito asked, trembling with fear. If that's the case, we might be killed here. It would be too shameful for a supreme god of the universe to be killed in his own realm. More importantly, if a supreme Kai were to be killed, the world would plunge into chaos. Goten-san should be able to control this energy, Shin said, though uncertainty tinged his voice. Goten had warned them earlier that he couldn't guarantee whether he could control the energy after transforming. The disappearance of his pupils at this time made them very scared. While the two were talking, Goten's figure appeared in front of them like a ghost. What? Shin and Kibito were stunned for a moment. Kaishin Salma, you don't have to be so afraid. I am not out of control, Goten reassured them, a smile playing at the corner of his mouth. As he spoke, pupils slowly emerged from his vacant, pale eyes. However, the pupils were no longer black as before, nor were they light green like a Super Saiyan's. Instead, they had turned into golden pupils. It was clear that Goten hadn't lost his mind after fusing with the legendary Super Saiyan bloodline. He didn't turn into a tool of destruction and killing like Broly. Instead, he could easily control his own emotions and sanity. This might have something to do with the system. That's really great. Shin sighed in relief. It really scared us to death just now. At this point, they could feel that Goten had returned to normal. His pupils had recovered, and the restless energy in his body had begun to calm down. This power is really ridiculously strong, Goten said lightly, clenching his fist and looking at his robust body. It's much stronger than Super Saiyan 2. It's not even comparable. He felt that this form completely surpassed Super Saiyan 3, and he could easily overpower Majin Buu. And if he wanted to destroy Majin Buu, the divine power of Ultra Instinct could definitely do it. After feeling the powerful force in his body, Goten also withdrew from the transformation. By the way, Goten-san, you are so powerful. I want to give you a gift, Shin said hurriedly after seeing Goten revert to his normal form. Presumably in this world, only you are worthy of using that thing. Kaishin Salma, are you talking about the Z-Sword? Kibito asked quickly. There weren't many good things in their god realm. There weren't many that could match Goten. The treasures of the sacred realm of Kai, besides the time rings, was the Z-Sword. The time rings could only be used by Supreme Kai, and they couldn't be given away casually. That Excalibur had been in their god realm for a long time, and it was so heavy that neither of them could lift it. Therefore, keeping it in the god realm was wasting the use of a good tool. If it was given to Goten, it might be able to display the true value of the Z-Sword. Yes, the Z-Sword, Shin confirmed. Both of us can't handle it anyway, and Goten-san has agreed to help us with Majin Buu. The Z-Sword will be even more powerful in the hands of Goten-san. Rather than giving it to Goten, it would be better to let Goten have that sword to completely eliminate Majin Buu. You're right, Kibito echoed. Just staying in the god realm, it really doesn't have much use. After all, neither of them could lift it. Each of the previous Supreme Kais used the Z-Sword as a weapon. It was also a good time for the sword to be given to the hero. The Z-Swords, Goten asked, intrigued by their conversation. But his interest wasn't in the Z-Sword, because that thing was no longer useful in his hands. And with his current strength, he didn't need any weapons. What interested him was the old Supreme Kai sealed in the Z-Sword. Although that old Supreme Kai was wretched and lacked strength, he had an ability that no one else had. It was about being able to help others develop their potential in the body. Gohan in Dragon Ball Z was a typical example. After his potential was developed, Gohan directly turned into Mystic Gohan, overpowering Majin Buu. That alone was enough to demonstrate just how powerful the old Supreme Kai's ability was. Now that he had fused with the legendary Super Saiyan bloodline, if his potential could be unlocked by old Supreme Kai, then his basic strength would definitely improve qualitatively. In the future, even if he met a strong person at the level of God of Destruction, he would still have the power to fight. It seemed that developing potential was something that must be done. And right now, in the sacred realm of Kai, it was a great opportunity. Goten-san, please follow me, Shin said respectfully. Kai-shin-sama, just call me Goten from now on. Goten replied, after all, you guys are older than me by how many years? And have been calling me sir all the time, and I also feel a little bit awkward. To be honest, he always felt unnatural to be referred to as sir so respectfully, and he was called that by an old monster who was older than himself. Okay. Goten. Shin quickly nodded with a look of emotion. Goten, who was so powerful, was neither arrogant nor impetuous in his interactions, and he didn't have any heirs in front of him. One must know that ordinary mortals with this kind of power would have long ruled the universe with great fanfare, calling themselves the Emperor of the Universe. So Goten's approach naturally moved him immensely. Then please come with me. Then, under the leadership of Shin and Kibito, the three came to a very strange cylindrical mountain. Then they lightly jumped and instantly landed on the top of the mountain. And in the center of the mountain, there was a sword. Goten, this is the gift I want to give you. The Z-sword. Shin pointed to the sword inserted in the crack of the stone and said, this sword is very heavy, and Kibito, and I can't move it at all. I think you will be able to use it just fine. And with this sword, your strength will definitely become stronger. Yeah? Goten smiled, then took hold of the hilt of the Z-sword. He tried it, and it was indeed heavy. It was no wonder Gohan struggled so much with it that he had to transform into a Super Saiyan form in Dragon Ball Z. But now he had been fused with the legendary Super Saiyan bloodline. Even his basic combat power had already surpassed Gohan, the Super Saiyan at that time. What was more, at that time, Gohan hadn't trained for 7 years, and in Vegeta's words, his body had already rusted. Then Goten's expression suddenly changed. With a strong pull, the whole mountain was shaken in an instant. Cracks also suddenly spread towards the surrounding area. Clang! In the next second, Goten easily pulled out the Z-sword amidst Shin and Kibito's expression of shock. He nonchalantly twirled it in one hand, as if it were a mere toy. Shin's eyes widened in disbelief, his suspicions growing. Was this truly their revered Z-sword? And why did it seem like a child's toy in the hands of Goten? This is not as heavy as I thought, Goten remarked, holding the Z-sword. He waved it around a few times, creating a series of sword arcs, making the Z-sword seem as light as a feather in his hand. Shin, slightly embarrassed, responded, that's because your strength is extraordinary, Goten. Sure enough, nothing came out good if you compared yourself with others. The Z-sword, which Shin and Kibito couldn't budge, felt like a toy sword in Goten's hand. This realization made them feel somewhat embarrassed, but there was no helping it. After all, Goten's power far exceeded their imagination. Is this thing durable? Goten asked, flicking the Z-sword lightly with his left middle finger, producing a crisp sound. The sound was good, indicating the material was of good quality. If it were placed on Earth or other planets, it would be a valuable artifact. But now, with his strength being so formidable, Goten naturally didn't take the Z-sword seriously. From the beginning to the end, what he was interested in was the old Supreme Kai sealed in the Z-sword. Of course, I'm quite confident it can help you defeat Majin Buu, Shin said confidently. But since you're skeptical, let me help you test it. He then raised his right hand lightly, and a huge metal cube appeared out of thin air. This is the hardest metal in the universe. We can use it to test the durability of the Z-sword. Goten, here it comes. After speaking, Shin threw the metal cube directly at Goten very confidently. Kibito also looked confident. He believed that Z-sword could slice through the hardest metal in the universe with ease. Okay. Goten nodded, already knowing how awkward the situation was going to be. He then directed enough power towards the metal cube. Bang! Click! With a loud bang and a crisp crack, the Z-sword snapped in the middle and split into two under the expectant eyes of Shin and Kibito. The metal cube, however, showed no traces of damage. Ha! Shin. Kibito. Shin and Kibito were taken aback, their eyes wide as saucers. Heavens, the divine sword of the Kais was actually broken. Kibito mumbled in disbelief. The strongest divine sword in their minds had been broken so easily. More importantly, the face slap came too fast and too loudly. Just now, they had boasted about how durable the Z-sword was. They didn't expect the Z-sword to be broken so easily. No way. That's a divine sword. Shin was still in denial. How could this happen? He was just bragging about how powerful the Z-sword was. After less than a minute, It was directly folded into two sections. "It doesn't seem as durable as you claimed," Goten said, looking at the broken sword in his hand with an embarrassed expression. Hearing this, the faces of Shin and Kibito turned even redder. They felt so ashamed and embarrassed. Just when the two were extremely embarrassed and didn't know how to alleviate their awkwardness, Goten looked directly behind them. Because behind them, a stooped old man had appeared. He had a pair of bubble eyes which were more than half covered by loose eyelids, narrowed into a slit, but they still couldn't hide that wretched look of his. This old man was naturally the old Supreme Kai who had just been released from the Z-Sword. As a transmigrator, Goten was naturally very familiar with him. Shin and Kibito also followed Goten's gaze. As soon as they turned their heads, they saw a wretched figure. "Ah!" With an exclamation, both of them were taken aback, their hairs standing on end. It was no wonder, after all, a wretched old man had suddenly appeared behind them. And he didn't make any noise, so it would be strange if they weren't frightened. But what followed were question marks all over their faces. Who was this old man? Why could he appear in their god realm? What's more, the costume he wore was very similar to the one worn by Supreme Kais. The old Supreme Kai coughed twice in embarrassment. "This old gentleman, may I ask who you are? How did you appear in our god realm?" Shin asked politely after calming down the panic in his heart. While he held no other specialties, he had a very good temper and was also very polite to people. "Me? I am the same as you, a Kaishin, from 15 generations ago," the old Supreme Kai said with a sullen expression on his face, not impressed by their behavior earlier. But these two guys were able to pull out the divine sword from the seal by themselves. It seemed that this generation's Supreme Kai was not too weak. "Hus. Ah." Shin and Kibito were shocked again. 15 generations of former Kaishin? Apparently, they found it unbelievable. They had never heard of a Supreme Kai from 15 generations ago, and they wondered how he had suddenly appeared. The old Supreme Kai immediately became popular with the two. He said that he was sealed by a very powerful guy tens of millions of years ago. Of course, he did it because he was afraid of himself. Then he asked who pulled out the Z-Sword. "Gozen-zo-sama, in fact, it was not me and Kibito that pulled up the Z-Sword, but Goten," Supreme Kai said with some embarrassment. Unexpectedly, it would be Goten who rescued the ancestors from the Z-Sword. This should have been their duty to rescue the ancestor. "Ha, trash." The old Supreme Kai first looked at Shin and Kibito with contempt, and then looked at Goten. "It's a mortal who rescued me. What a disgrace to Kaishin. But forget it, I'm already out. Since that little mortal can pull out the Z-Sword, it looks like he has a lot of power. Those who could pull out the Z-Sword would definitely not be too weak. One must know that he was sealed by that big guy. If one was not strong enough, it was absolutely impossible to pull out the Z-Sword. Furthermore, it was even more impossible to break the Z-Sword. Yes, Gozen-zo-sama. Goten is very powerful, much stronger than me and Kibito," Shin immediately proudly introduced. "He is the most powerful warrior in this universe. At least in his cognition, Goten was the most powerful existence. Even Majin Buu, the most feared, was not necessarily Goten's opponent." "Ha! A frog in a well," the old Supreme Kai said dismissively. According to him, if one talked about the most powerful warrior in the universe, it was absolutely impossible for it to be anyone else. It was that big guy who was sleeping. He was the most powerful existence in the entire universe. No god or mortal could compare with him, not even reach 1/10,000th of his strength.